Hello, class. Miss Roberts here, and today we're going to talk about class. Excuse me. We're going to talk about Chapter 4: Systems and Cultural Approaches to Organizational Communication. So far, we've been going through a historical analysis and just looking back on how modern organizational communication has evolved. So let's begin. Today, we're going to recognize the difference between the machine metaphor, systems metaphor, and cultural metaphor for describing organizational processes, explain the system's components, processes, properties, and illustrate these ideas, organizational communication examples, and understanding the value of studying communication networks at various levels of analysis. We want to appreciate Wake's theory of organizing is an important way to make sense of working of organizational communication and know the culture metaphor for understanding organization as versus develop as a prescriptive model for improving organizational performance and be able to describe the weaknesses of this prescriptive approach. Then finally, appreciate the ways of describing organizational values as complicated, emergent, unitary, and ambiguous. All right. Okay, so with systems theory, we want to go back to biology, if if that makes sense. If you think of a system, an organizational system like the human body, it'll make a lot more sense. Now, as I walk you through the systems theory, just hang with me. I also have supplemental videos that will help you out with it because there's a lot of moving parts, like the human body. So when you think of an organization like an organism, right? We have several components of that system. Hierarchical ordering. So this is arranged by highly complex subsystems and super subsystems. So the book describes it as think of your nervous system as being your brains and nerves, and your circulatory system, meaning your heart, veins, arteries, the respiratory system. So these are really large systems that are comprised of smaller subsystems. Now, well, hang with me, because then they're interdependent. So, like the body, in order for one to survive, your circulatory system, respiratory system, endocrine system, nervous system, they all need to work together to make you you and keep you alive. So think of an organization like that. There are different departments, different sections, different sectors. They all work together for the sake of keeping the organization going. And permeability. So it refers to the system as a whole and components within the system. Also, when we think of how permeable it is, how much information retains or maintain or is maintained the system itself, and how much information gets out, and how much information from the outside environment gets in. All right. So now that we have those parts, because the system theory, and I remember as I was learning it in the very same class, it's a lot of parts. But we have the book, we have this video and supplemental videos for us to break it down. So there's two types of processes that characterize several operations. Processes of exchange and feedback, but I also want to break down these terms before we get into those processes. So we have inputs and materials and information from the environment through boundaries. So in an organization, we can think of those boundaries as gatekeepers, the employees in the organization, um, receptionists that receive outside people, and communication professionals that manage communication in the system. Those are just a few examples. Then we have throughput. So how does the organization transform or process the information? What do we do with information from the outside world? How do we engage with customers? What do we want the customers to know? What do we want to do as a business to serve our customers, serve our community? And then we have outputs. Is the system returns and what's transformed or transform outputs to the environment. So that could be customer satisfaction. So that would be the aftermath the of interacting with the organization. The book uses an example of an insurance company. So the inputs for the insurance company would be making the claim. The throughput would be putting everything together, trying to figure out a quote like, hey, how much would the payout be? All those processes that make that processing the insurance claim possible is the throughput. And then we have the output will be the check, the results of engaging with that organization. So the process of exchange, so now that we know what inputs, inputs, and outputs are, the process of exchange are the inputs and outputs that require exchange with the outside environment. So when we think about organizations as systems, excuse me, they can be more closed organizations or more open organizations. But there should be some exchange, a controlled exchange, but some exchange in the outside environment, meaning the community, meaning other organizations, anybody else outside of those are affiliated with the organization. And then we have feedback. So we have corrective feedback, negative feedback, and positive growth feedback. So feedback that enables the growth of the organization. Okay, so let me throw myself down a little bit. All right. So to dive into feedback a little bit more, negative or corrective feedback helps maintain the system via deviation reducing feedback. So for example, say if someone gets um, not necessarily reprimanded, but if they say the wrong information and then someone corrects them and says, hey, here's the right information to share with others. So that's the feedback that is correcting a problem or just making sure that the system or the organization or the exchanges with the organization thrives properly. But then we have positive growth or deviation amplifying feedback, right? So there might be a change in the system through growth and development. So, for example, excuse me, think about the changes that AI is posing through not only higher education, but all throughout many organizations' systems. So many organizations are incorporating AI into making processes easier for their employees, making processes easier for their customers. So, for example, I have a Toyota and I have to go to my Toyota to get maintenance, right? So I have the maintenance screen on my car. And for the first time, I call Claremont Toyota and I'm like, this sounds like a person. You know that uncanny valley? Like it sounds like a person, but it's not a person because something seems off. Like she would say, hey, I'm going to process your appointment now. Like nobody's talking like that, right? So I'm like, they're using AI. And the crazy part is, you can hear this loud clanking of keyboards in the background to make it sound authentic. But I never really heard loud clanking of keyboards before. So I'm like, they're using AI to process my appointment. Okay. So in this example, there's a change in the system. So instead of having a live human receptionist handle the appointments, they're probably just having them handle the front-facing customers. There's a change in the system's functioning, and they use AI to help grow and develop it. Let me move myself here again. Excuse me. So here are some more properties of the system. System theory is a lot. But if you break it down and try to have how I learned it when I was coming up, when I was taking this class, I just used the body metaphor, try to find examples in real life organizations because it's a lot of parts, just like the human body. I never took anatomy and physiology, but I'm pretty sure there are devices that help you learn the intricacies of the human body. So we have the four systems. We have holism, suggesting that a system is more than some of its parts. So each section of the system or the organization, I'm using these kind of interchangeably here, but each part of the organization, say the communications department, finance department, customer service departments, operations, upper management, all those departments work together to make sure that the whole organization is working, but they can't really work by themselves. Then we have equivalent finality. So it refers to the system's ability to reach the same final state from differing initial conditions and by a variety of paths. So even though these different departments do different things, they're all going towards the same goal, making the organization run and doing their part for the health of the organization. But then we have negative entropy. The system's success and their survival depends on the active exchange with the system's environment. So like I said before, with probability is to the degree of how much information is closed in the system, how much information is open within the system or organization, right? But what sometimes organizations can do is they remain so closed or so stuck in their ways and not changing that the environmental conditions might change. So when I say environmental conditions, introduction of AI, financial conditions, like overall macroeconomics, as far as like, hey, what is the economy doing? Changes in the consumer or clients habits that may impact the organization goals themselves. So making sure that they have that actual exchange of information, knowing those trends and being able to adapt to those trends is very important, or else the organization will go down and not be sufficient, or especially with business may fail. Then we have requisite variety. It's the internal workings of a system that must be diverse and complicated as the environment in which it's embedded. So think of all of the inner workings of maybe a small business versus a medium-sized business versus a large business, right? A smaller business might have a couple of clients, which to that one person or those few people might be, very hard to manage because they only have so much um, people power in order to manage the needs of those clients. But as the company grows, they hire more people, they're able to withstand or be able to accommodate those clients a little bit more, right? But think of large organizations like Disney and Netflix. And they have so many departments, so many divisions all over the world that they're able to meet the needs and accommodate the world. These are global organizations. They can only do that because they were able to expand and pull from diverse talent and make sure to have enough departments and enough complications in their internal system to accommodate the demands of those companies. All right. So the summary of a systems basics, and I like these summaries because there are a lot of components and a lot of parts to this theory, but at least we have them on that one table. One way that I learned it is thinking of bodies and thinking of the body, or the human body, and thinking of organizations that match that, right? You can also think about how Cal Poly is, or your university, as a way that these systems come together. So, for example, it's hierarchy ordered. So we have smaller subsystems embedded in larger subsystems. They're interdependent. So they depend on each department depends on each other for functioning. They're permeable, so we have to be open to this environment to some degree and make sure information is flowing through the organization. So they grow and the system's components are open to each other, so open communication. Exchange feedback, so input and output processes require exchange between the system and its environment. Throughputs are the exchange among those systems. So information that goes in, it gets processed, and the environment or publics or whomever is the recipient of those processes. Feedback processes, so we can have corrective feedback to make sure that the system's steady, or growth feedback that allows systems to transform and change. So it's the balance of these two that help the system work or the organization work. And then principles, holism, because interdependence, the system is more than some of its parts. Externality, there are multiple paths that each part of the system or organization can take. They have the one goal of putting the organization forward. Negative entropy, excuse me, because the system is open to new information and is informed, it can make changes based on the environment. They can avoid deterioration and thrive. But super closed systems are at risk of failing because they are closed. They're not necessarily knowledgeable about the outside world and those outside forces and information that can impact the organization. And then requisite variety. Because of systems openness, a system should remain the external complexity. I mean, excuse me, maintain internal complexity, I apologize, necessary to cope with external complexity. So depending on size, not just use size as an example, but we also talked about technological advances. Early in the semester, we talked about politics and how it can impact the organization. So all these factors, the organization has to be complex to meet the demands of the outside as well. All right, so this is the purpose of organizational communication. So let's talk about networks. So we got through systems theory. Ooh, that was a tough one. So let's talk about communication and how the flow of communication works. So we have network context, so the flow of information, affection, or influence. Semantic networks is for how words and ideas are connected within the context. So I'll show you in a little bit where we have an example of people within an organization and how we have people by themselves, people in their own silos, and then they have others that connect others together. So network mode. There you go. It's communication medium that the linkages are maintained. So when we think about the transactional communication model, what are some of the types of media that keeps us together? We have text, we have written, we have verbal, we have video. So what are some of the ways that communication is maintained by the organization? Network density, so the degree of interconnectedness among network members. So they're people by themselves in their own silos. Think about systems theory, about how within an organization we need to be connected. So to what degree do those connections happen? Communication is very important. Everybody needs to know what everybody else is doing. Not necessarily micromanaging anybody else, so I don't want you to get confused with that. But we need to understand, like, hey, what are you doing so I can make sure that I'm doing my job properly, making sure that we're all working on one accord. And then level of analysis, it's connection between individuals within a given organization and interorganizational networks considered links among the organization. So, for example, so within the organization, who talks to each other, who's connected with each other, whose job descriptions are connected, and who are some people that can go to the side. I'll show you in the next couple of slides what that looks like in an organization. But even the people off to the side are still a part of the organization. So there may be consequences for them not being super connected to others because they have to interact with each other eventually because they might need to get information. They might be support. They might be upper management that need to give top-down instructions. So connections within an organization is very important for the organization to thrive. Can you move up again? All right. So here are some properties of network links. Communication flowing between two people, one that has endured over a long period of time, or the exchange that's deemed important by the network participants. So let me go say that again. So there are different types of link strengths. One being um, the communication that's flowing between two people is one example. Long enduring communication, so how long communication has been going on between the parties, or or exchange that is deemed important by network participants. So it could be all of these, one of these, or two of these. Symmetry of communication links. So two nodes involved in the link have the same type of relationship with each other. So think of maybe same type of power, horizontal communication, not necessarily top down or down up, as we've been talking about before. And multiplexity of the link. So it's a number of different kinds of content that flow through particular kind of link to organizations that share material, resources, information, personnel said to have multiplex links. So, for example, we might have different organizations that might talk to each other. So think of a nonprofit that might take donations from a for-profit organization. So these are multiplex, excuse me, it might be two organizations that have multiple links to each other, but then they have representatives from one organization, we can see others to make the exchange or the donations happen. We might have government organizations that interact with private organizations. So, for example, I am in the middle of like starting my own business. So I myself am an organization, I guess. And then I had to get a license from my city. I had to get my tax organizations together. So that's me as a business or as an organization of myself. I had to interact with more than one outside organization outside of myself. So that can be the multiplexity of a link, making two organizations that share material, resources, information, personnel that has those multiplex links. So I'm going to myself again. All right. So we have network roles. So this is just a description of how people excuse me, how individuals in an organization are connected with each other. So we have isolates, people who don't talk within the network. So in this case, don't talk to their coworkers. We always have that one that are by themselves. You have the bridge, the people who are highly connected. So Sally knows this person, this person, this person, this person. Then you also talk to Sally, and then she connects us all together. Think about a friend group. You have that one person that connects us all together. To the bridge. And liaison. Radically different connections, but they come together. So let's see. So we have the isolate over here with Mike, but also consider where it goes. And then Hitoshi's on the side as well, but they just have one link. Sonia and Hitachi are by themselves. Then we have Tomas, who connects you and me, and Natalie. They're all in one circle. And then, of course, we have this circle over here. It's connected to Ernest and Dan, which connects these circles together. So Dwight and Ernest connect them together. And then Mike is just by themselves. All right. All right. So there's also the explanatory mechanisms of the reason that network develops and maintained. So the book describes it as activist organizations be can arise from a group. So think about maybe union organizations or employee advocacy organizations or charities that can arise from an organization, workplace networks, and then organizational departments are ways that networks are developing and maintained. So these are the reasons why people talk to each other. Ooh, I just moved myself again. There you go. Thank you so much for finding space. All right, so Carl Weck's theory of organizing. So the central to Weck's theory is organizing is the idea that organizations exist within an environment. And here are some ways that that organization sorry, I need to interchange organization as a thing, but organization as the process of organizing. Pardon me. But the process of enactment, so different organizational members will input information inputs with different meanings and create different information environments. So with the organization members interacting with each other, there are different meanings with that. So for example, the book talks about how a boss can call someone into the office, and depending on who the person is, one person will be like, oh, okay, we're meeting to discuss a new initiative, versus one person will be like, oh no, I'm in trouble. So depending on who that is, they will enact different meanings within that exchange. Equivocality is inherent unpredictability of information, or is it excuse me, inherent unpredictability of the information environment of an organization. So this means because people are unpredictable, we don't know um, how the exchanges will go. We do have our norms that dictate how this goes about. Then, of course, you have the outside environment, but information itself is unpredictable, but we take the information and we use it how we can. Then we have set patterns of sense making. So these are rules. So since information is unpredictable, we have the rules, procedures, sometimes recipes or scripts in this theory that guide organizational members. So because we have the process of enactment, people have different meanings to the information. Information itself may be unpredictable, so sense making helps put it all together for us. So the major goal of organizing is reducing equivocality, so reducing that unpredictability in the information environment. Now, next, the culture metaphor. So we have heard, or especially if you worked for a larger organization, you might have heard the idea of company culture. So let's see where that came from, or let's just see like, hey, how does a company culture impact organization communication? Okay, so so prescriptive approaches to culture, deals in communities, strong cultures. So think of the top organizations, and I believe the book uses Netflix as an example. Think of the large organizations that might embody these values or these components of a strong culture. We have strong values, beliefs, and visions, and everybody, even people outside the organization, know it. Heroes, so individuals that become exemplify the organization's values. The book talks about Bill Gates as the hero of Microsoft. Rites and rituals, so ceremonies through which an organization celebrates its values. And cultural network, the communication system through which cultural values are instituted and reinforced. So with excellence cultures, these are prescriptive approaches to culture and foster and to respect. So in our objective, and with prescriptive approaches, it's not that prescriptive approaches are bad, but like we were talking before, systems theory and the previous theories, that not everything goes to plan. What you should do, if you're stuck on what you should do, then it does give you a way to adjust to what you have to do in the face of changes. So it's naive to assume that there is a single cultural formula for achieving organizational success, and it's true. We have different demographics, we have different goals. Technology is changing all the time, as we see with AI. So yes, so a single formula that might have worked in 1980 probably wouldn't work today. These prescriptive approaches treat culture as a thing that an organization has, not as what an organization is. So it's this, the culture is the story that we tell ourselves, but we have to have the processes and we have to have the behaviors I should say, of the organization to back that up. Because we can say, oh, we treat each other like family, but if your employees don't feel that way, then there's a mismatch between the story and the culture. Excellence cultures emphasize the importance of people and downplay bureaucratic structure and values. Okay? So I'll have you guys read this either in your book or just on that slide. But it talks about the Netflix seven aspects of culture and how it exemplifies it. So the values that we value, high performance, freedom, responsibility, context, not control, highly aligned, loosely coupled, paid top of the market, and promotion and development. So I'll have you guys read that. Let's see. Yeah, so definitely pause to read that if you want to. All right. So descriptive and explanatory approaches to culture. So organizational cultures are emergent. So they're socially created through interaction of organizational members. And there are several characteristics of cultural performances. So how do organizations perform said culture? They're interactional, so it's the participation of multiple organizational members. So the most organizational members have to be involved. And contextual, so they're embedded in the organizational situations and organizational history. I always think of Disney. I used to work for Disney, so I always think of Disney in regards to this. So, for example, I remember during this orientation, we had to learn about the history of Disney, Walt Disney himself, and then learn about how his vision for the company permeates through our day-to-day work. So, in that way, matching Disney's history of, making sure that the guests are okay, making sure that the guests feel welcome, making sure it's a manageable place for everyone. That's still the ethos for the company to this day. And besides, so there's different events that reinforce or changes to the company culture. And sometimes they're improvisational. So no scripts that guide the organizational members. It's just what we do. Okay. So organizational cultures are not unitary. So non-unitary organization nature of organizational cultures, they have multiple cultures rather than subcultures. So we have the culture of top-down management, horizontal. So what goes that? Excuse me. The excuse me. I keep doing this. Sorry. So the power structures that are side by side and specific work groups. Subcultures emerge based on demographic similarity, maybe based on age, maybe based on different type of work, maybe based on subcultures, so on and so forth. Organizational cultures are often ambiguous, so the fragmentation perspective highlights the challenges of interpreting multiple manifestations of organizational culture. So sometimes we might not, as far as like not being prescriptive, sometimes different aspects of organizational culture arise just from those interactions. And we might not understand or intrinsically know what makes those makes the culture unless we take a deeper dive like we did with Netflix. But the day-to-day functioning, the interaction with people, they have their own thing and we might not be able to define them. It's that those relationships are unique to those people within the organization. All right. So here is the summary. We got through system theory. When I was coming up, that was a doozy of a theory because I think about the body. I thought it was organizational communication, but hopefully those examples helped. You recognize the differences among the machine metaphor, a systems metaphor, and cultural metaphor for describing organizational processes, be able to explain systems components, processes, and properties, and illustrate these ideas with organizational communication examples, understanding the value of studying communication networks at various levels of analysis, appreciate Web's theory organizing as an important way to make sense of the workings of organizational communication, and my apologies. Oh, my apologies, class. I know that the cultural metaphor for understanding organizations was first developed as a prescriptive model. Excuse me. My apologies. Sorry. Thank you so much. Let me try that again. Now that the culture metaphor for understanding organizations was first developed as a prescriptive model for improving organizational performance and be able to describe the weaknesses of prescriptive approach. And finally, appreciate the ways of describing organizational cultures as complicated, emergent, unitary, and ambiguous. All right. Well, thank you so much for exploring this chapter with me. If you have any questions, please let me know. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you soon for the next chapter. All right. Thank you. Bye.